Hi, my name is Moshe Kindler, and I'm the publisher of The Jewish Link,
Hi, this is Elizabeth Kratz. I'm editor of The Jewish Link.
and you're on the Jewish Link Pitch Meeting podcast. All right, we are Elizabeth. We're here today with a very special guest, someone I've known since ninth grade.
Oh, wow.
Okay, and actually our family goes back generations, which maybe we won't speak about. His name is Rabbi Dovid Gottlieb. He's here on a quick trip from Israel, and he's the managing director of an organization that you did not hear about. Okay, it's called Tzalash. Welcome, Rabbi Gottlieb, and I'm going to have to call you David. Okay, our families go back to Cincinnati, go back 3 generations, and certainly Rabbi Gottlieb has been. We've known each other for a long time, and we were in Smicha together. I'm a retired rabbi. He's actually a practicing rabbi. He'll tell you more. And welcome.
Thank you, Moshe. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
So I'll just say I'm sitting in shul on Shabbos. I know that's not exactly how it happened. Okay. But this Shabbos was there was a Shabbat Chayal in our shul, and Rabbi Gottlieb was the featured speaker. And I knew about this coming, and I knew about Rabbi Gottlieb coming, and I said, we should do something. I heard him speak on Shabbos, and I said, well, we have to invite him. So Rabbi Gottlieb gave out to the crowd, and I'll just tell you, when you told me about this a few years ago, I thought the core, your 10-second elevator pitch was keeping guys in the IDF more frum, more inspired, dati. That's what I thought Tzalash was. And you're going to tell me everything. I think we want to hear about what Tzalash is, and also, of course, what's been going on the last few months as well. So let's start the beginning.
Where should I start?
The beginning.
Actually, the truth is, what? Let's do. Rabbi Gottlieb was a rabbi, one of the largest shuls in North America. I don't know if you realize that. Shomrei Emunah in Baltimore, so he's also a little bit of a semi-retired rabbi. He did the cycle, actually. He was tell us a little bit about your professional history, just without going to that, and how you got to Tzalash, and how you didn't get to Tzalash, and how they kind of got you back.
No problem. So. Okay, so the short version of our aliyah is that after Smicha and in the Kollel, in 2003, I moved to Baltimore, where I became the rabbi of Shomrei Emunah. As you mentioned, a very wonderful and dynamic shul. We were there for 6 years. And in 2009, we moved to Israel, ostensibly on a sabbatical. And I was pretty upfront with the shul.
He never came back.
Yeah, but I was upfront with the shul. There's a chance I might stay. That was very much upfront. But I thought most likely I'd come back. But as it turns out, we told the shul mid-year that we are staying. My career has gone in all sorts of different directions since I've been in Israel. But where I found myself 3 years ago was a full-time teacher, a Rebbe in the Gush, Yeshivat Har Etzion. And we had just finally been successful, after numerous years of work and planning, of building a new neighborhood, a suburb of Ramat Beit Shemesh called Ganei Ha'elah, which was a community which I had helped build with other wonderful partners. And we had just moved in, starting a shul, which I am the rabbi of this new community. Not looking for anything else. It was hard enough to get those 2 jobs. Happy to be in Israel, fulfilling the family dream and helping the Jewish people, I hope, in those 2 capacities. The first Pesach of Corona, that original Corona Pesach, when you couldn't even be with your parents, that one. So my oldest son drafted into the army through Hesder a few days after that Pesach. And he went into the army very vibrantly, passionately religious and committed, Baruch Hashem. But it wasn't that long after he got into the army that he would call us and describe some of the challenges that he and some of his friends were facing. And as an American who obviously didn't serve myself, he was my first child to go through the army. When you send your child to the army that there might be physical dangers. You don't expect October 7th and a real war, admittedly, but it's the army. But I guess there was a little bit of a suspension of disbelief. I wasn't expecting that there'd be religious challenges. He himself was very committed. He was with a Hesder group. And yet he was describing certain challenges that just come with the exhaustion and the challenge of being a full-time soldier. And we didn't really know where to begin other than to do what all parents do, try to make suggestions, to daven a little bit, that kind of thing.
Talk about things like Shabbos observance, that kind of stuff?
I don't know what would have happened, but at that point, it was nothing that serious, God forbid. But it was just, you're so exhausted. So do you get up for minyan? Do you get up for davening? You had plans to learn while you're in the army? Reality hits even before the war. The war is a whole other level of intensity, but even just in basic training and normal service, they are so physically exhausted, so mentally exhausted. Even though the army officially is supportive, I call it par to positive, 99% of the time with the religious soldiers. But still, your religious observance is not going to be instead of your army service. It's something that the religious soldiers have to do in addition. And it's hard.
They have to get up earlier to daven, I know that.
As an easy example, exactly.
Yeah.
So I didn't really know what to do. And we were nervous, and we helped in whatever little ways we could help. P.S., he finished his army service a year and a half later, and I would say he was at the same level or even stronger. What happened? I'd like to take credit for it, but I really think that was not the answer. Because shortly after that conversation, initially, all of a sudden he started talking about this organization called Tzalash and this rabbi named Rabbi Peretz. I never heard of either of them. But they were helping him in all sorts of ways. And of course, I was grateful. Some people asked me, how did you get involved in Tzalash? First, I said, as a donor. On whatever level I could be. But we were supported out of gratitude, out of Hakar Tov. So I heard through my son that there's this great organization who's helping religious soldiers. Fast forward, and 3 years ago, right, this time of year was about June 3 years ago, this Rabbi Peretz, who by that point I had met a few times over the phone, but never in person, he asked if he could come see me, and I was not expecting what would come out of his mouth, but what came out of his mouth was, will you join me? I need a partner. At that point, it was 6 or 7, 8 years old, but it basically had been a startup, and I think there's a lot of parallels to the non-for-profit and the for-profit startups. One of them, which is that most don't make it, and there are all sorts of things, and Corona was a wave that certainly could have crushed something like Tzalash. And yet, through Siyata D'Shmaya and hard work, they made it. Was
it mazel that they touched your son's unit? Because I'm sure there were tons of units you probably wasn't touching.
So the answer is yes. It was a lot of it was mazel. A lot of it is the, for lack of a better term, business plan of Tzalash, which is still the case, but certainly was the case when Tzalash was smaller. A lot of their work pre-service is through the Hezder Yeshivos. So they know and have relationships with soldiers, and soldiers know about that even before they're in the army. That's kind of the pregame, if you will, that really is the investment that then pays off, hopefully, when they're in the army. So my son had met them. I don't know how memorable it was before he was in the army, but he knew what Tzalash was even before he went to the army. I didn't know. But then, yes, thankfully they go to a lot of units, but they certainly were in his unit. And to his credit, he took advantage, right? Or any organization, including ours, you go to a place like the army, you're offering all sorts of things, but no one has to show up. You don't have to be the guy who, when the rabbi says, if you want to call me, here's my phone, you don't have to call. But my son did. So my son does a lot of credit for taking advantage of the opportunity, but Tzalash really helped him. And like I said, they had made it, as he said, Peretz, as a startup, but he felt he had gotten as far as he could. He had, at that point, already a few employees, some full-time, others part-time, but all not on his level. And he was looking for someone to be on a senior level to kind of be partnered with him.
A tough question. The IDF rabbinate doesn't have that role?
It's a very good and common question that I get asked. I was not there at the beginning. As I said, I'm only joining. And then I'm happy to tell you why I ended up joining or how that happened. But I obviously did join, which is why I'm here today. That was 3 years ago. So I was not there 11 years ago when the organization was founded. I think that in the beginning, there probably was a few awkward interactions. That's my sense. Because the real answer to your question is, and I'm not saying this is a judgment, but I think this is just as a fact, the Army Rabbinate does not see their role in that capacity. They're an arm of the Army itself. And to the great credit of the Army, which goes back to Rav Goren's time, the Army officially provides certain minimal religious services to make sure that religious soldiers can comfortably serve. It's an amazing thing. Until Rav Goren made certain changes, the Army was not religious at all. It wasn't necessarily kosher. It's mind-boggling to think about in hindsight. So the whole Jewish people owes Rav Goren a debt of gratitude for those kind of changes. But the Army Rabbinate makes sure that the kashrut in the Army is excellent, so people can feel comfortable eating on any base. There's Eruv, that kind of religious functionary. I am sure that here and there are rabbis in the Army Rabbinate who see themselves in the shepherd religious inspirational model, but it's not really part of the job description as far as I understand. And the bottom line was there was a gap. There was a lacuna. It wasn't happening, certainly not on a mass scale. If there would be, then there wouldn't have been a need for Tzalash. So I think in the beginning, probably there was like a, who are you and why are you coming to the Army? We're the rabbinate. But I can tell you, way before I joined, and certainly in the 3 years since I've joined, I can attest personally, we work beautifully with the Army Rabbinate. They're very much, appreciative and respectful of our role, and we show great appreciation and mutual respect for them. So we work hand in glove now, and it helps. They can help make things easier for us. If God forbid they wanted, they can make it hard for us, but they don't. They respect what we're contributing. We show them the proper deference and respect, and we actually work very well together. But it's not really what they did before we started, and it's certainly not now. They see us as a partner who's providing the service, and we see them as a partner who provides their service. But just to finish the story about Rabbi Peretz, when he came to offer me this position to join, I said, no, this is not a Disney fairy tale or an art school story. It didn't end with me saying yes and everything. I actually said no. I had no experience running an organization, and I was very happy, as I said, finally having achieved my two twin dreams of being a rabbi in Israel and being a rebbe in a great yeshiva. But he's very persistent, and he is so sincere and dedicated to the mission. It wasn't that he didn't take no for an answer. That was not accurate. It's that he didn't understand what the word no meant. Because as he said to me more than once, but the Jewish people need us. But the Chaylim need us. So what do you mean no? I don't understand. So when somebody is persistent and you are convinced that they're that sincere and that passionate, it impacts you. And I said, maybe. At some point, when I had to finally make a decision, somebody recommended that I consult with the very famous and important Rabbi Usher Weiss, who I knew a little bit before then, but I can't say I really knew, but someone who was very close with him made the connection. And I ended up having a pretty significant conversation with him where I laid out the dilemma and, should I make this jump? I can help the soldiers, but I assumed I'd have to leave Gush. I'd give up a dream of sitting, teaching Torah, learning Torah at the highest level. And he told me, listen, if you say you can't leave the Beis Medrash, you're so committed to your Torah study and teaching, he says that's your right. Even though this Rabbi Peretz says he needs you, it's not your responsibility. But, he told me, if you are being pulled and you're asking, is it even the right thing to do? To leave the Beit Midrash, to close the Gemara, to, learn much less than you probably had been, to help the Chayalim, to help the soldiers. He says, all I could tell you is one thing. To help the Chayalim in the way that Tzalash does is Kodesh Kodashim. There is nothing more important. That's a quote from 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. So after a few weeks of total paralysis by analysis, I couldn't know what I do, I walked out of his office and said, I'm doing it. A lot has happened since then, but that's the not so short version of how I got involved and been working very hard ever since. Even before the war, and obviously the last 7 months have been a whole nother world. And
you're sure that Rabbi Peretz didn't speak to him before in advance?
That is correct.
Okay.
So, two questions, I guess.
Please.
The first one is, so Tzalash is essentially reaching out, providing sort of services to maybe the Shomer Shabbos, learners, the lamdans, I guess you call it, within the greater Chayalim community. Is that?
You asked me who's our target population?
Yeah, like those are the people who are seeking out.
So the answer is, in theory,
okay,
we are, and in practice to some extent,
everyone.
We serve everybody.
Okay.
But we do have a targeted audience.
Okay.
In part because there's a certain niche that we feel needs support and we want to offer it to them. And also, some of it has to just do with size. We're not big enough to be all things to all people, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. So our official, you could say, target audience, like I say, you have to know how to stay in your lane. So our lane is more or less what you described. It's soldiers who went into the army, not only from religious backgrounds, but mostly who came through Hesder, or to a lesser extent, what's called Mechina, or there's something called Yeshiva Gavoha, all different ways that religious people in Israel will use some kind of educational religious framework to then go to the army. So that is our main target audience, in part because they really, as we alluded to before, weren't being served for whatever the reasons are. It's not a criticism; It's just a fact.
But Sepharim, which you shared, you're able to provide a certain number of sort of small pocket size cargo pants fitting Sepharim, including Mishnah and Gemara, and so that's a nice thing that people might not have if
correct. So everything you said is correct. I'll back up for a second to contextualize it. Our if you ask the average parent, or soldier, or for that matter, rabbi in Israel, they are more or less, some more and some less, aware of the religious challenges in the army. I think if you ask most people, they assume from afar that the source of the problem is a combination of two related points. That overall, it's a secular, very mixed environment, and you don't have to be from Mea Shearim to grow up in a bubble. Bergen County is a bubble, Beit Shemesh is a bubble, even, there's a modern Orthodox bubble, just like there's a Haredi bubble.
Yeah.
And they're not the same, but they're certainly not the army either.
Right.
So all of a sudden, our kids are going from a much more homogeneous environment to a much more mixed environment. And then you add, for religious young men, the fact that the environment's also co-ed. So that I think the average person would, and I'm not saying that those aren't challenges.
Mm-hmm.
The basic premise of Tzalash and all of our work is that those are more downstream. They can trip up a chayal, but they're not they're more the symptom than the cause. The real challenge, we feel, for the most part, and obviously you're talking about thousands. Last year we were programming, we touched about 10,000 soldiers. So I'm obviously being simplistic if I give one explanation for 10,000 people. But overall, our premise, and I think we have been proven to be correct as diagnosticians, is that the deeper challenge is much more subtle, but if untreated, can be more damaging. And that is that you take young men who grew up in our community, especially if they went to then yeshiva for a year or two or more before they went into the army, the spiritual nourishment that they're accustomed to, their spiritual identity, as young men in particular, is wrapped up in things like davening and minyan and shul attendance and learning. The army, not through any conspiratorial reasons, just because the army's mission is to protect the Jewish people, is not focused on either of those two things, and leaves very little time, and as I mentioned before, energy for either. So over time, if you're not consciously trying to run up the down escalator, you're going to be removed from that. Now, I want to pause and I want to add, even if everything I said is correct, I don't mean that, Rabbi Peretz, we don't mean that as a criticism of the chayal. Not only on a human level can I understand it. As a rabbi, I can even make a halachic argument why they are exempt in all sorts of circumstances from certain mitzvahs because they're preoccupied with more immediate, more urgent mitzvah. All true. But at the end of the day, I would say this is true for adults, but it is certainly true for young men, 19, 20, 21. At some point, if you don't fill up the car, you're going to be on empty. If you don't go back to nourishing yourself spiritually, it can really be alienating. You can believe, as I certainly do. I have 2 sons and a son-in-law who've been serving since October 7th. And I'm committed professionally and personally. I have many skins in this game. Mm-hmm. You can believe that it's a mitzvah, and yet it's not a nourishing mitzvah. Mm-hmm. If anything, it's a very draining mitzvah. It comes with a great cost. So our diagnosis is we have to figure out ways in which, despite their challenges, they can remain connected to active, positive religious experiences and, as much as possible, Torah study. Not only because those moments in and of themselves are valuable, either on a prosaic or metaphysical level, but even just a psychological self-identity formation. If you don't do that, then the other things we spoke about, the environment, etc., now you're vulnerable, right? You have a lower immune system, so to speak. Now those other temptations may rear their head. Even if you have a very strong immune system, it could be a challenge. But you can't compare. So what we try to do is not reactive, this person went down XYZ or is struggling or is tempted by XY, now how can we help them? We do counseling. We have on our website, and all the soldiers know, every staff member has their cell phone and their WhatsApp, and we're available 24/6, as we like to say. And we do all sorts of counseling, sometimes when people call us with their fears or their struggles. But on a programmatic level, our programs are intended to provide not reactive, but preventative, if you will. And all the different programs that are in that brochure that Moshe mentioned, they're all different. But the common thread, the common denominator of all of them is exposing them and hopefully giving them opportunities, not only for positive, but for active Torah study or religious experiences, not passive. All the staff are very talented speakers, teachers, dynamic, not only parrots, but all the people we hire, we look for that. But even so, when we visit an army base, which we do a few, even before the war, we were doing hundreds per year, the focus is never the lecture, the shiur, because that's passive. We want to engage them and give them a sense of the positive learning experience, and of course with excitement and passion, so that, and here's the key point, after we leave, they have the resources and the motivation to continue. Because the reality is, even if we were at a particular army base every week, which is not true, there's no base that we visit every week. We're not, if I had many more staff members, maybe, but now not even close. But even if we were, it's still a fraction of the time. So even if every moment we were on the base was magical and incredible, even if, that's still only a fraction of the time. The real magic of Tzalash happens when we're not there. Hopefully what we're providing them then gives them the motivation, the strength, and the independence to carry on. And in order to do that, so then we have all these different types of programs. But that's the idea, to keep them connected. So just to get back to the way you originally phrased the question, there are a lot of challenges, which I saw with my own son, even for the people who come from strong religious backgrounds. There are plenty of people who come from more moderate religious backgrounds. They certainly can have challenges. And we try to help anyone who's interested in our programs. When we go to an army base, we don't say only, show us your kippah. Of course, not everyone's invited. And the truth is, we have stories, wonderful stories over the years of people who were not strictly religious, who've been exposed to and had a positive experience. I'll mention to you, Moshe, you heard me talk about on Shabbos. I mentioned even just now that I got involved because of Rav Asher Weiss. So fast forward to the war, I mentioned on Shabbos that one of the most successful and impactful and I would say transformative projects that is a new initiative since the war started was taking Rav Asher Weiss's Svarim. He's arguably one of the most prolific and popular writers. Forget personalities and leaders, just his actual books.
And also kind of spans the Haredi Dati Lumi divide.
Correct.
A little
So
bit.
he is saying across the spectrum, his Svarim, Minchas Asher, are maybe the most popular in all of Israel, and on a very high level. And we had requests from soldiers to make special editions, pocket size for Chayalim, of his Svarim. To date, Moshe is holding there the Vayikra volume. That's number 6 of the Minchas Asher. That's the 6th volume we've published. At the moment, I'm literally working on one on Sfira Omer and Shavuos, and then a Bamidbar, but we've already published 6, which we've distributed more than 10,000 volumes. Not only from the Lebanon border throughout the country, but when, months ago in Khan Yunis we were learning it, and right now that is in Rafah.
Wow.
So just last week, we had given out thousands of these copies of Vayikra, and I received, right before I came to New Jersey for Shabbos, I received a video from a soldier. They're in some kind of a jeep or transport vehicle. The person who's talking is religious, and he's thanking us for the Svarim. I only recognize him because I've been helping him throughout the war. It's not someone I know really personally, but it's not the first time he's thanked me for Svarim we gave. But then in this particular one, the video is on him and somebody else. They're both wearing the hard helmets. I don't know where they are, but they're somewhere in Gaza. But he describes that other person he's with is a doctor. He's the doctor in the unit. And he says, he put it there, I won't tell you which kippah he doesn't wear. The doctor is not, he goes, "Aval hu lovesh kazda." He wears a helmet. In other words, he's a soldier. He's not religious. And they have a chavruta in Minchas Asher. He said he doesn't wear a kippah, aval Torah hu ohev. But he loves Torah. So there is all sorts of other stuff that we do, but our main focus are the religious soldiers. That's our lane, if you will. Also, there are political sensitivities. If we would start trying to be, if you will, a Chabad or a classical outreach organization in the army, I think the next time we went to an army base might be the last time. Because I think, rightfully so, people would be resentful, kfiyah datit, religious coercion. Not only in all of our years, no one's ever complained about us. Better than that, the army at its highest secular leadership loves us. Because first of all, we're providing a free service to them that a very big percentage of their soldiers enjoy. But more than that, something that I can't say is our goal, but we're obviously super happy and proud as a side benefit, we have numerous testimonials from mid-level officers to people in the most senior positions in the army, that when Tzalash has a program on an army base, in the aftermath, the soldiers are better soldiers because they're more motivated. It's hard. And yes, it's true. And obviously places like Bergen County and others have done a lot, particularly in the war, to provide the right goggles and the right boots. And I'm not saying that's not important. It's all important. But in the end of the day, these are all people who are risking their lives, long, difficult circumstances. They don't have the motivation. They don't see a certain meaning in it. Now, the truth is, during the war, just saving the Jewish people, everyone understood as an existential fight. Maybe that would be enough. And even then, I think they appreciate what we're doing. But especially before the war, and presumably at one point there will be a day after the war, it's a slog. Not always. And it's easy to get unmotivated and get lazy. It's human nature. And all of a sudden you have a program with Tzalash, which is not only inspiring you with Torah, but giving you inspiration for how what you're doing is holy service and it's meaningful. Again, as I say, it's not just the religious soldiers telling us this. We have numerous testimonials from officers, including very senior people in the Army, how much they appreciate our work because it helps keep the soldiers more motivated and better fighters.
We also were involved with, in so many levels at the beginning of the war, with tzitzit being delivered. Or like, remember how we had like these bags coming, people were bringing bags from Israel to America
To put tzitzit on and ship them back.
so that kids could tie them and then bring them back after the weekend. Tie the tzitzit. So there was a sense,
Yes.
at the very beginning at least.
We were involved in that also.
Yeah.
I shepherded tzitzis, among other things, to the north, to the south, many times.
Nice.
That's correct.
So like that, it made, I guess, us in Chutz La'aretz feel like, okay, these Jewish boys, wherever they came from, they know why they're there.
I think that's correct. It's an interesting phenomenon. That was not true before the war.
Interesting.
And I don't think it's so likely to be after the war. I would like it to be, but I wouldn't strongly predict it. There was something about the war, the fear, and again, it's way beyond what we could, I guess, talk about today. But I think it revealed something which I'm not the first person to have observed, but I think it is a data point, if you will, on the fact that the presumed polarization of Israeli society is not nearly as extreme as people think. That there is I don't know what the numbers are. I'm not an expert in this, but there's clearly some sizable part of the Israeli population that is not religious the way it's sometimes formally defined, but they're not anti-religious and they may not be as far away as we think. Exactly right.
And the IDF has always been seen as the great leveler, so to speak. I mean, even for people who grow more secular, the fact is they're serving with religious guys. They're more. I'm saying that's always been the impression.
Correct. So that is both an opportunity and a challenge. I think that it's definitely a challenge for sure. I've seen it with my own children. You know, all of a sudden they're not only exposed to temptations. I mean, they're exposed to, in some cases, impressive people. I noticed this with one of my sons. I have a son who currently is serving. He has allergies, so he couldn't be in combat. So he's in, I guess for lack of a better term, it's an important kind of an intelligence unit. He's attached to what's called Pikudat Tzafon. He's in Northern Command. And since Simchas Torah, he was in the army before Simchas Torah, but his unit is on such high alert because of Hezbollah since Simchas Torah. His actual work is in a bunker multiple stories below ground because it's too important to be a target. So I saw this even before the war when he started his service in his unit. You know, most of our kids, and I didn't raise my kids in Bar Park or Bnei Brak. And my kids were, you know, I consider myself relatively open but still in a religious environment, in a religious neighborhood. The most impressive people, the smartest people that my son had ever met were rabbis. Now, not every rabbi is so impressive or so smart. I'll be the first to admit that. But thankfully, we had sent him to good schools, a very, very top yeshiva, and the top rebbeim, the top rabbis in those places that he had been exposed to, and through me, he's met other rabbis. The only people he knew who were like, wow, were rabbis. He knew of other people in the world, because, as I say, we're an open family. But all of a sudden, he went to the army. And contemporaries of his, let alone more senior people that he was working with, from the Air Force. Again, I don't even know everything that he does, and I certainly couldn't talk about it on a podcast if I did. And I'm not pretending I do know. He can't really tell me what he does. But I have some sense. Super impressive people.
Right.
Super smart. And for a 19, 20-year-old religious boy, like, how do you process that? Now, luckily, I had not spent his whole childhood telling him that only religious people are smart, or that could have actually been really dangerous had I done. But I don't believe that. I never said it. But still, it was a process for him to internalize. What does that mean? Like, these are people who don't believe everything I believe at all, but they're good people.
And they're just as dedicated to the state of
Just
Israel.
as dedicated. They're just as impressive.
Right. It broadens the universe, and with when the universe broadens, it does come with risk. I guess is what you're saying. And like I'm like worried. Like we're all worried. All the moms are worried, and like my nephew who spent the first 150 days in Gaza, then just went back.
Yes.
And it's like this crazy, like what you don't know what is being kept, and also it's not our responsibility to you have to sort of trust that the army is providing a different kind of chinuch at this point. And so like the balance of making sure products are available to them and making sure that the food is kosher to whatever extent, even whether that would matter, but also do they have people to ask, like piskei halach? Like, I mean, remember the conversations we had earlier with not just Rabbi Brody, but our writer from Eretz Chemda.
Rabbi Mann.
Yeah, Rabbi Mann, who is like, he has guys serving and guys who are sitting in the base midrash, and the questions are like complex.
So we get, again, even though that's not officially, so to speak, the service of Tzalash, but we get questions all the time. Of course, I am quite aware of that.
And do they have like, is there a pipeline?
Yeah,
like,
the answer is yes.
Okay.
The truth matter is that is something that the Army Rabbinate does provide.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Depending on where you are, the war has been uniquely challenging.
Yeah.
Obviously for physical safety, but even for the issues that you're describing, which is that there are certain numbers of soldiers who are in large groups or on established bases. And then there is the infrastructure that you're describing. The Army does have an infrastructure where people can ask shilas, even theoretically emergency shilas. There's a hotline. Again, Tzalash has that too, but the Army has it. But during the war, you can have 10 or 30, 20 or 30 soldiers in an outpost somewhere. I mean, my own son, who for 5 months was on the Lebanon border, now he's home, but June 4th he's going back and probably into Gaza. So most of the time, or should I say most of the time, but a significant part of those 5 months that he was on the border, he was not with some larger brigade. A small number of soldiers and he were camouflaged. He looked like a bush lying in a creek right on the border in case Hezbollah terrorists would come across. So if he had shilas, there was no one there to ask.
Right.
He could send a text to somebody. He could call me. But the normal infrastructure, as we saw on every level, religious and material, has been completely stressed.
Yeah.
By the Army. I'll just mention in case, I don't know if it's your sister-in-law, whoever you said you have a nephew, but one of the things that you reminded me, one of the things that we did, which was also new during the war, which I think might be of particular interest to your audience, is that there's obviously enormous fear for the families. Mm-hmm. Now, I imagine, 10-generation Yerushalmi families might still fear for their husbands or sons too.
Yeah.
But there's a unique challenge for people like me, and maybe friends of yours or siblings of yours, who are first-generation Anglo-Olim. We don't have a culture. We didn't grow up on stories when Abba was in the Yom Kippur War, when Abba was in the, when Saba was with the Six-Day War. It's all new to us, and our current children who are serving this is the first war we've been part of.
Right.
So that's hard for the soldiers, obviously, but it's uniquely challenging, I think, for the families. So we actually started a number of months ago, free service, and we have therapy groups with very, highly trained therapists for mothers.
That's amazing.
Of soldiers. And we actually grew it. We had 2 groups going for a while. And I'm not embarrassed to say, nor do I think she would, that one of the women involved was my own wife. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's
beautiful.
Everything's very private, but I'm not part of the conversations. I'm not a mom, so I don't get to be on the conversation. I was happy to provide the service to them. We had two different cohorts, but I know that, especially in the beginning, when there was so much fear,
Yeah.
this was really a lifesaver for them.
Yeah, there was a lot of mom hysteria at the beginning, definitely. And like the WhatsApp groups were shrill, and like it wasn't just like I need to buy like 5,000 headlamps because like my, nephew's brother's cousin said they need headlamps. Like there was like this
Desperation.
this feel, and it wasn't just moms. It was like random people are going to Target or Walmart here and like buying out their entire selection of like long underwear or whatever it was.
Right.
And there was
There's a
sort
lot
of
of
this,
confusion.
like,
It's
drama.
not my area of expertise. I do think that there was probably a lot of waste.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure every rumor was actually accurate, but the Jewish heart is kind and compassionate, and
Yeah.
when they feel there's a need, they send duffel bags evidently.
It was, yeah, definitely.
But what I like about you is there's actually less waste in the area
Right. You're
of
like
spirituality.
the
Meaning,
Correct. As I say, I can't say, who am I to say what's more important?
Right.
But what I could tell you is of course they need vests and they need gloves, and again, I don't know what they did or didn't
like,
really
what-
have, but they also need, and not just that they need, I'm not saying that from on high, what they're telling us they want is religious support as well. So again, they need both, and I'm not the one who's going to split the baby to decide if a person only has $100, where should they send. Everyone has to make that decision on their own. But there really is a need and a desire on their part. They want the services at all the different levels that we provide. They want it.
Good. I have one more question.
Please.
Just because I didn't get someone to ask this. What was Pesach like for the people serving?
Just now.
Yeah, like the ones that, whether they were in Gaza or sitting on the Gaza border or in the bunkers under multiple stories underground.
So I think, the answer is it was hard. In my particular family's case, I mentioned we had three, two sons and a son-in-law, on Simchas Torah, who ran off of the Hakafot to somewhere. So the one son I mentioned to is in kind of an intelligence unit, and the other two were in combat. It happens to be they're both in reserves, the two combat soldiers, and they were both off for Pesach.
Okay.
So they were with us. So they had a wonderful Pesach. Again, my son-in-law, as far as we know and as far as he knows, for calendar year 2024, hopefully is done, unless there's another, God forbid, huge call-up. My son, who has been off since about Purim time, in June 4th, it was supposed to be June 5th, they already told him now it has to be moved up to June 4th. He's going back in as far as we know Gaza. So he, I'm sure had some level of anxiety over Pesach.
Shavuot.
Yeah, and he'll be in for at least 40 days, who knows how long. So he had some anxiety, I would guess, over Pesach, because he knows he's going back. But the bottom line is those two are with us. The son, who is in less obvious physical danger, but he didn't get out. He was, in the bore, as he calls it. He was in his bunker. He was underground. So I will tell you, I know what we did in general for soldiers and families. I'm happy to tell you about it, and I'll illustrate it even just through my son's experience. So if you're in the type of units that he's in, he has 12-hour shifts, very intense. There are times where he's, all day, and then he, has to sleep. He can sleep normal hours, as we would say. But for much of the time, he has had the, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m.
Right.
I mean, just to give you a sense, on Simchas Torah, when he went in, that first week, it was nonstop, overnight stuff, and underground. There's no light. There's no phones. He called me, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, Wednesday night. He thought it was Erev Shabbos. He had no sense of time. That's how intense the work was, how crazy it was down there.
Wow.
So it's not like that now. It's definitely less intense. But he was on, I don't know if it was 9 or 10 at night, maybe 10. He was working
Right.
on the Seder night. Forget that he wasn't with his parents.
Right.
He was working.
Right.
So when he finished, it wasn't yet midnight, he went to the Chader Ochel, the dining room, and I think 4 Chabad guys had come to his base and were running a Seder, which we appreciate. He said it was But what he told me, speaking to something you mentioned before, he said that after it was finished, him and 1 or 2 of his other religious friends and 2 or 3 non-religious female soldiers, they sat and had like a magid for a few hours. And he shared Divrei Torah, our tunes. I hope they liked our Manish Tana. We're very possessive of our Manish Tana tune in the Gottlieb house. Anyway, so I think it was hard. It happens to be middle of Chol HaMoed, he got off. But he did, it's a Seder he'll never forget.
Yeah, unique. That's
Yeah, it's a Seder he'll never. I could tell you.
maybe it doesn't sound like a reduction in like chizuk there. Like
Right,
that
it was just
sounds like
completely different. Right.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we did, a huge project for the masses of the soldiers, was we had a specific edition of Minchas Asher for Pesach, which included a Haggadah
Oh, nice.
and commentary. So they had one book which had also the Devar Torahs if they wanted, but also the Haggadah. So if they were on a mountain somewhere or in a bush somewhere, they had that. And one thing I'm also proud of, we have which we didn't speak about at all, but I'll just mention briefly, we have a division called Eshes Chayil, which helps the
Nice.
married women of soldiers. It's kind of a double entendre. Eshet Chayal, Eshes Chayil.
Yeah, not just the moms.
Oh, I thought you
ma-
meant.
the
I
marriage.
actually thought you were talking about female soldiers, but not.
No, that's a separate thing.
Okay,
That's
okay.
a new thing.
Uh-huh.
But we have had for already 5 or 6 years a division to help the young soldiers who are, nowadays in our community too, there could be a young married couple and there could be many women who are doing professional careers too. But for now, let's assume that the husband's in law school or medical school for who knows how many years, or he's traveling for work. That there are challenges when you're a young couple for sure. But there's also, in Israel, you have that. But you also have somebody who's 21 and got married and their husband is in the army for the next 2 or 3 years. So there are huge challenges. He comes home even without the war. I mean, before the war, there are challenges. We were helping about 350 couples before the war started. The first week of the war, we sent out the word for all the reservists who'd been called up and their wives. We were open for business. Within a week, we went from 350 to almost 4,000.
Wow,
Now that number has gone down since in the last 7 months because
that's people utilizing services.
yes,
people.
correct. We had all sorts of. We had Zoom, Shurim, YouTube things every single night the first few months of the war. Programming. We, like many other people, we certainly in our own unique way did tens of barbecues at army bases in the first few months of the war. Until Pesach, we were still doing them very regularly. But I think we did a very special way, but we're not the only people who did that. I'm aware.
Yeah.
One of the things I think we were the only people doing is things like that for the wives of soldiers. Not on army bases, but people who have nice homes in Ranana and Herzliya and other places would open up their home, open up their backyard, and we would invite tens of women and their children for a dinner. We'd have bouncy toys for the kids, and we do all sorts of programs. So we were doing tons of different things for them. But specifically when you asked about Pesach, so it hit us only a week or two before Pesach, that there are all sorts of women who are going to be home alone. Their husbands, again, leave aside the danger and all that. That's all.
Yeah.
But just they have to make Pesach.
Who's gonna make right?
And maybe there's financial challenges. So thankfully, in part because of generous donors, we were able to identify almost 100 families and give them gift cards where they could go and purchase everything they needed for Pesach. So it was a unique Pesach, and hopefully not to be repeated.
Wow. Yes. Thank you.
Last words, David. Wow. I'm just actually, it's funny. I'm more inspired now than I was even on Shabbos. So, and I actually have heard the Tzalash Pish. You've given to me twice before, I think, or at least once or twice before. Yeah. So, just any specific projects you're fundraising for, anything specific you want to ask our readership audiences for? I mean, you're about a $2 million a year organization.
Yes, thank God. So when I started, we were about 600,000 plus. And in the last 3 years, so now we're about $2 million. That's correct. We have a lot going on right now, thank God. In particular, for those for whom the books might speak to, we have 3 different books that we're in the process of publishing, which all, of course, need funding. We have the Minchas Asher project, which is super, super popular, both Sfira Omer and Shavuos. That's going to be a single volume, and then Bamidbar. And also, Moshe, as I've mentioned to you, I had the great privilege of writing my own books for the soldiers. And also, I did it on Parshat HaShavua. So I recently finished the 4th volume in the set. In Bamidbar, which is coming up in 2 weeks from now, hopefully I'll finish it soon, is the 5th and final volume of the set. So for people who are interested in books, that is something that we are working on right now and certainly would appreciate sponsorship for. That would be wonderful. The programs that we have for the wives of the soldiers are ongoing. And one of the things that is new this year, that's been a little bit truncated because of the war, but we now have a separate division for lone soldiers. We have been helping lone soldiers from the beginning, just because we go to an army base, we help everybody who's there.
Like a nephew.
Yeah, like my nephew.
Not only lone soldiers, but we always understood that there are unique needs of lone soldiers. And already last year, a year ago before the war started, we, thank God, had gotten to the part where we could afford to scale and hire a specific staff member who is amazing, himself had been a lone soldier, and is very dynamic and wonderful. He was actually with me in Teaneck for Shabbos. I
that was
spoke in
him.
3 shuls. He spoke in 3 other shuls. He also spent the first 4.5 months in Gaza. So that's to say, he wasn't able to do as much work, quote unquote, for us because he was doing work for the Jewish people in Gaza. But
Still in Milwaukee.
at the moment, he is back working with us, but he expects, who knows when he'll get called back. But we do have all sorts of projects that are lined up for them. And certainly, if there are people for whom that would speak to, we would be very appreciative of any support or help. Thank you.
How can people find you online or
So thank you for asking.
WhatsApp?
Yeah, so our website is tzalash.org, TZALASH.org, tzalash.org. Also, just in case anyone's wondering, they shouldn't be confused, like, what is tzalash? It doesn't mean anything in English.
Oh,
It means nothing.
Right.
There's no code. There's no mystery. It's just the English, phoneticization of the Hebrew word, which is tzadik lamed shin, tzava l'shem shamayim. So it's an abbreviation. It's also a double entendre for people who are familiar with Israeli slang, because more commonly, tzalash, which is a very well-known word in the Israeli spoken Hebrew, tzalash is tzilun l'shvach, like a gold star. So if you get an award, in school, you might be told by your teacher you got a tzalash. Or more to the point, in the army, when you get an award at the end of basic training or whatever, you get a tzalash, which means the gold star or the big check plus. So it's a very clever title because it's a abbreviation and a name that people in Israel are familiar with. It also speaks to who we are, Tzavat L'Shem Shamayim. So in English, it can be sometimes confusing. People forget because it doesn't mean anything in English. It's just the Hebrew word with English letters. But TZALASH, tzalash.org. That is the website. And if you go to the website, not only can you learn about the organization, and of course you can contribute, but you also have my phone number. My phone number is up there. My email is up there, and I would be happy to hear from anybody.
Okay. Well, first of all, David, thank you. I'm hoping you come back as maybe as a Tzalash fundraiser, maybe advertise on the Jewish Link as well.
Okay.
But by the way, I say that also as a sign of success, meaning like as you grow, as you strengthen, and your roots grow here in the fundraising side, we'll see you again in the paper.
Yes.
In the Jewish
yeah,
Link. So.
because the American Friends of it is currently listed in Fort Lauderdale. Just so you know.
Okay, that's all right. No, I don't hold it against them. Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks for
very
being
much.
with us. Thanks for being with us on the Jewish Link Pitch Meeting podcast. If you would like to participate or be in touch with us in any way, please email us at editor@jewishlink.news and follow us and find our podcast wherever you find podcasts.